What if Noah hadn't been the first to build an ark? The question echoes like a crack in time, a sound that rises from ancient waters and touches the surface of our understanding. Because before Noah, perhaps there already was a world so alive, so powerful, and so corrupted that the Creator himself had to erase it from the pages of eternity. And what we call Genesis may not be the absolute beginning, but merely the beginning of a second story. The Bible is a book that speaks in layers. There is what is written, and there is what has been veiled. In Genesis there are subtle references, generations of old, giants on the earth, sons of God who took for themselves the daughters of men. Phrases that seem simple, but hide profound secrets, like windows open to an era that predates the known Eden. An era in which the heavens and the earth witnessed something so great and so terrible that only the silence of the waters could bury it. Imagine a time before memory, when the oceans still whispered names we now forget. Men and women walked beneath a copper sky, and the stars seemed closer, as if the veil between the divine and the earthly were thinner. There were cities of light, temples built on stone columns, and a spiritual science that has been lost. Those who lived there knew no limits, and that was precisely what doomed them. Genesis 6 is a key few dare to turn. When it says that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, the text seems to merely describe an ancient episode of rebellion. But what if it were more? What if there was a trace of a misinterpreted divine intervention, of a hybrid civilization that emerged from the mixture of the sacred and the profane? The result would have been a world where power surpassed control, where gift became corruption. The ancient Hebrews called these beings Nephilim, the fallen ones. And when the Nephilim walked the earth, the purity of humanity began to fade. The oldest traditions, long before Noah, spoke of a golden age that ended in catastrophe, an earlier flood, a sea that covered not only lands, but memories. And in the depths of these waters, the Creator sealed what remained of a lost humanity. But why isn't this flood recounted openly? Perhaps because the divine purpose was not merely to destroy, but to restart. Just as an artist erases the canvas to begin his work anew, God would have cleansed the world of a creation that strayed from its purpose. Noah's flood, then, would be merely an echo of the first, a repetition, a reminder of what man is capable of when he tries to be like God. There are biblical passages that seem out of place, as if they were fragments of an older story. In Proverbs, God speaks of wisdom established before the foundations of the earth. In Job, we find mention of creatures who witnessed the waves of the sea when it stood like a wall. These verses sound poetic, but they may conceal traces of the first destruction. A time when the Creator, seeing corruption spread like poison, would have said again, "Enough." And when divine wrath was unleashed, the world trembled. Waters rose from the depths, the heavens tore apart, and mountains disappeared beneath the roar of the ocean. Entire cities were swallowed. The towers, which once touched the clouds, became prisons of silence. And when the last breath of air was lost, only the sound of waves crashing against the ruins remained, the heartbeat of the earth erasing an era. But something survived. Memories, fragments, echoes. Perhaps that's why in the most ancient cultures we find the same memory. The Mayans speak of destruction by water, the Egyptians of divine purification, the Sumerians of a flood that swept away a forgotten humanity. They are different stories, but with a common pulse, a universal echo that seems to come from a single source, the flood that time tried to erase. When Noah appears in the narrative, he doesn't inaugurate justice, he restores it. His name, meaning rest or comfort, is the symbol of a new covenant, not the first. The world he inherits is the result of something that came before, of a buried era. This is why Genesis says that The earth was corrupt before God, even before the ark. How could it be corrupt if sin was still beginning to spread? Because traces of ancient corruption still lingered in the dust of the mountains and in the veins of human blood. It's possible that Noah's flood was the second act of a cosmic drama. The first, erased by antiquity and fear. The second, preserved to remind us that divine justice is patient, but not blind. Ancient humanity may have mastered forces we still don't understand, energies, spiritual knowledge, lost technologies. But power without reverence breeds ruin, and the Creator, in his infinite wisdom, preferred the silence of the waters to the permanence of corruption. Imagine the sunken cities, stone-paved streets, columns twisted by time, temples where the sound of worship has been replaced by the roar of currents. Beneath these ruins, perhaps the testimonies of the first humanity still rest. And perhaps that is why the human heart still fears the sea, because within its depths lies the reflection of a fall we have already experienced. And when the waters receded and God's wind blew again over the abyss, the world awoke anew. Noah, the new guardian of the promise, walked upon a land that had already been destroyed. And as he gazed at the empty horizon, perhaps he felt somewhere in his spirit the weight of stories that did not belong to him, but that ran in the ancient blood of humanity. For Noah's flood did not begin with him. It simply overtook him. Scripture is discreet about this, but it leaves traces, mentions of the ancient days, the giants of the earth, and the wrath that destroyed the world are like divine footprints left for those with searching eyes. Perhaps the true mystery of Genesis isn't how it all began, but how many times God has had to start over. The forgotten flood is more than a catastrophe. It is a mirror. It reflects the cyclical nature of humanity: creation, corruption, destruction, redemption. And each cycle carries the same purpose: to cleanse the world so that the divine can breathe again. The first humanity, the one that time did not preserve, was erased not out of revenge, but out of love. For the Creator destroys only that which has already been destroyed within. When we look at the sea today, we see only water and horizon. But beneath every wave lies a memory, a temple, a name, a prayer. The flood before Noah is not just a lost story, it is an eternal warning that every time man tries to equal God, the world is covered by water again. And perhaps that's why Scripture ends with a promise: never again will the world be destroyed by water. Because the next flood, the last one, will not come from the sea, it will come from the soul. A purification not of stone and mud, but of fire and truth. Before the world was recreated by Noah, another had already disappeared. But who were these beings? And what did they do to make God himself erase them from history? There are stories that time tries to bury, but which continue to echo beneath the earth's layers. They are ancient voices, coming from peoples who have never met, but who tell of the same tragedy: a world drowned long before Noah was born. What if these accounts were not just myths, but distorted memories of the same primordial event? A forgotten flood, recorded not only by the Bible, but by the human soul itself. The Sumerians were the first to record what they called the Great Flood. On their clay tablets, the hero Ziusudra, also known as Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh, is warned by the gods that a storm would destroy all life. He builds a boat, saves his family and animals, and in the end, the vessel rests on a sacred mountain. Centuries later, this narrative would appear almost identically in Scripture, under a different name, Noah. But what's startling isn't the similarity, it's the time. The Sumerian myth is 1,000 years older than the biblical account. And it wasn't just the Sumerians. The Babylonians also spoke of a flood sent by the gods to punish human corruption. The hero Atrahasis received divine instructions, built a round boat, and survived the destruction. In India, Vedic texts tell the story of Manu, the first man to survive a flood that destroyed all of humanity. He was warned by a deity disguised as a fish, and in the end, repopulated the earth. People separated by oceans and millennia, but with the same story: corruption, warning, the ark, the mountain, renewal. How can we explain this universal repetition? Coincidence? Collective imagination? Or is it the echo of a memory that has spanned generations, a testament to something that actually happened before the biblical flood? Theologians call this the memory of the waters, an archetypal vestige of primordial destruction. The world was purged, not just once, but in cycles, each revealing the same divine pattern of judgment and rebirth. Archaeology, with its dust-covered hands and patience, finds traces of this mystery. In excavations in ancient Mesopotamia, layers of marine sediments were discovered over the ruins of cities that should never have been reached by the sea. Among them, Ur and Shuruppak, places mentioned in Sumerian narratives. These layers show that something colossal did indeed occur, a flood so widespread that it turned the desert into an ocean. But the chronology confounds scholars, as the sediments date back thousands of years before Noah. It is as if the soil itself says, yes, there was a flood, but it was not the first. The Bible, even without going into detail, leaves clues that the world before Noah had already known judgments. In Genesis 1:2, the original Hebrew text reads, "The earth became formless and empty." The verb became, hayata, suggests that she wasn't created that way. She became that way. Something happened between the beginning and the creation. It's what many call the interval of chaos, a mysterious space between two worlds, between what existed and what God restored. Some scholars believe this time period houses the previous civilization, the one destroyed before Eden, when the earth was covered with water. The primordial flood, the initial abyss, the waters that covered the world before Adam even took a breath. And when the prophets speak of the old generations who perished through ungodliness, are they referring only to the time of Noah or to something earlier? In 2 Peter 3:6, we read, "The world at that time was destroyed, submerged in water." But the same apostle speaks of the heavens and the earth that were of old. This suggests layers of existence, different eras, each with its own beginning and end. The Hebrew word olam, which we translate as eternity, also means hidden age or hidden world. This raises the hypothesis that the scriptures speak not only of a physical world, but of spiritual civilizations, planes of existence that have been completely erased. Civilizations that have left traces in humanity's spiritual memory, manifested in myths and legends. That's why, from Egypt to Central America, the same symbol recurs. Water as judgment, as purification, as end and new beginning. Noah's flood, Ziusudra's, Manu's, Deucalions in Greece, Gunyu's in China, they all tell the same story, and they all end the same way. A saved man, a mountain, a new covenant. This doesn't seem like invention. It seems like memory. But what civilization did these stories speak of? What kind of humanity lived before the one we know today? Perhaps a race of giants, not just of height, but of power. Beings who, according to Genesis 6, were men of renown, the mighty men of old. A people who mixed divine strength with moral corruption. Their cities were built on heavenly wisdom, but their arrogance transformed temples into fortresses and knowledge into idolatry. They exalted themselves too high, and God brought them down. And when they fell, the waters rose. Modern science unwittingly confirms the echoes of this destruction. Geological research shows that between 10,000 and 12,000 years ago, sea levels rose abruptly, swallowing vast territories. Entire plateaus disappeared beneath the sea. Doggerland, between Great Britain and Denmark, Sunderland in Southeast Asia, regions near the present-day Persian Gulf. all inhabited by peoples who disappeared without explanation. Could they be descendants of the forgotten civilization? Perhaps this is why ancient cultures speak of gods who came from the sea, as if the ocean were a portal between worlds, guarding the secrets of the past. These parallels between archaeology and scripture do more than raise theories. They reveal a divine pattern. The Creator acts in cycles: creation, corruption, restoration. And the flood is the most powerful symbol of this process. The waters represent judgment, but also the womb, the place where the world is purified and reborn. The Hebrew scribes called this uvabohu, the chaos that precedes life. And according to ancient rabbinic traditions, before Adam existed, God created and destroyed other worlds. He created and destroyed 7 times before resting, say the sages. This echoes the idea that Noah's flood was merely the final chapter in a series of cosmic purifications. Each of these destructions would have wiped out civilizations that lost their sense of light, and each left traces, not material, but spiritual, in myths, symbols, and dreams. Perhaps that's why we feel a strange familiarity with flood stories. When we read them, it's as if our hearts recognize something forgotten. An ancestral longing for a world that once was, but which carries within it the same flaw: pride. Legends of civilizations like Atlantis or Mu are modern variations of this same echo. Plato claimed that Atlantis sank because of its arrogance and spiritual corruption, a narrative identical to that of Genesis. And the Egyptian priests who told this story to the Greek philosopher claimed, "You Greeks are children. You do not know the first flood." These words echo like a divine whisper, a reminder that oblivion is part of the punishment. Because the worst death is not the body that sinks, but the history that is erased. Thus each myth, each tablet, each fragment of stone is like a grain of memory trying to resist oblivion, a divine puzzle waiting to be pieced together. And each time an archaeologist excavates submerged ruins, each time a theologian opens the original Hebrew, the same enigma resurfaces. There was a flood before the flood, and if there was, what did he come to purify? Perhaps it wasn't just physical corruption, but a spiritual rebellion so profound it shook the heavens themselves. Perhaps it was the moment the angels left their abodes and corrupted creation. Perhaps it was the point at which ancient man, more powerful and more conscious, chose to be God rather than servant. And when the Creator saw that the light had become darkness, he breathed again on the waters. The same breath that creates also destroys, because in God, judgment and mercy are the same hand. The waters rose, time faded, and the world returned to silence. But the memories, those didn't drown. They spread among peoples, among languages, among dreams. And today, when we look at myths that seem disconnected, we realize they all tell the same secret. Before Noah, it had already rained. And if these stories converge so much, perhaps they are not inventions, but testimonies, echoes of a lost humanity, recorded not in books, but in the very consciousness of the earth. But who were they? These first men, these giants of light and fall, what did they do to attract the judgment of the waters? Some believe the answer lies in the giants, the children of the fallen angels. What if the origin of Earth's deepest evil lay not among men, but among the stars? What if the first sin was born not in Eden, but in the hearts of angels who dared to desire what was not theirs? The Book of Enoch calls this, "There are 2 watchmen left, celestial beings who abandoned their post on high and descended to earth, attracted by something that not even angels should touch: human blood." Genesis 6:4 describes the mystery in a few words, but enough to change the whole story. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men. The text is ancient, but its implications are abysmal. Sons of God, B'nai Elohim, is the same term used to describe celestial beings in Job 1:6, those who presented themselves before the divine throne. They were not men. And when these beings crossed the boundary between heaven and earth, something forbidden was born. The Book of Enoch, preserved in ancient Ethiopian Jewish and Christian traditions, details what Genesis only hints at. It says that 200 angels, led by Samyaza and Azazel, made a pact on Mount Hermon. They would descend to earth to mate with the daughters of men. From the union between the divine and the mortal emerged immense creatures, the Nephilim, beings with the strength of 1,000 warriors, celestial wisdom, and insatiable hunger. But this strength became a curse. They devoured all living things, and when the earth could no longer sustain them, they began to devour humankind itself. And it was then that the sky revolted. God looked down and saw a creation corrupted to the core. The angels had defiled the very edge of existence. Light had mingled with flesh, and the result was a world that could no longer be saved, only purified. It was the first judgment before the flood. Water, a symbol of divine purity, became the instrument of destruction. And the roar of the seas was the sound of punishment. The mountains trembled, the valleys drowned, and the cities of the giants were wiped from the face of the earth. The Book of Enoch describes how the rebellious angels watched the flood helplessly, trapped in eternal abysses, while the children they had begotten were consumed by the waters. The ancient world disappeared, and silence reigned again. But ruins remain. In distant places, where the sea touches the horizon, traces of something history cannot explain are found. Colossal megaliths, stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons, cut with a precision that even modern engineering cannot replicate. Machu Picchu, Baalbek, Göbekli Tepe, the Easter Islands, they all share the same signature: impossible constructions, temples built by hands that knew more than they should. Could these be traces of the Nephilim? Remnants of a civilization born from the mingling of heaven and earth? Ancient legends say so. In Lebanon, Baalbek is said to have been the throne of the giants, built by the sons of the gods before the flood. In Peru, the Incas said their walls were built by the Chulpas, men of enormous size who lived before the present-day sun. In Greece, the Titans were buried beneath the mountains after defying the gods. And in Hebrew tradition, the Rephaim, descendants of the Nephilim, inhabited lands before the people of Israel arrived. Everything converges on the same memory: beings of immense power destroyed by divine judgment. And there's something more disturbing. In Genesis 6:4, the text says, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also afterward." This means that somehow part of that line survived, that Noah's flood didn't completely erase the angelic blood. Perhaps because the Watchers weren't completely destroyed, just confined. Or perhaps because evil, once introduced into the flesh, can't be completely removed. Hebrew scholars note that Nephilim comes from the root nephil, which means the fallen ones. But there's a double meaning: those who made them fall. They didn't just fall, they made the world fall with them. And the ruins of the ancient world seem to whisper the same truth. With each submerged temple, with each collapsed statue, the same story resurfaces: a humanity that played God and was swallowed by the waters. Cities like Yonaguni in Japan now rest beneath the sea, with steps and columns carved with sacred geometry. Structures so ancient they defy human chronology, and in all of them the same silence, as if time itself had forgotten what once was there. Imagine, for a moment, the end of this first world. Giants walking among men, their shadows covering the valleys, their eyes glowing like fire in the storms. And then thunder, the sea rising, the stone walls crumbling, the 1,000-ton temples being swallowed by the waves, the voices of the Nephilim echoing in despair, drowned under the weight of judgment. The sea closed over them, the sky erased the memory, but the echo remains. And if today we are still fascinated by stories of titans, fallen gods, monsters and heroes, Perhaps it is because their blood still runs in our spiritual memory. The book of Enoch tells us that after the destruction, the souls of the Nephilim neither ascended nor descended. They were trapped between worlds, disembodied spirits wandering the earth, seeking possession, hatred, and dominion. This is how the text describes the origin of demons. Not fallen angels, but hybrid descendants of angels and humans imprisoned in the limbo of matter. And when we read the Gospels, something chilling happens. Jesus casts out spirits who immediately recognize him. "We know who you are, Son of the Most High." How could they know if they hadn't seen him? The answer lies in the time before time, in those days when heaven and earth touched and the Creator judged those who dared to cross the line. Every megalithic ruin, every myth of sleeping giants, every mysterious skeleton is a reminder of heavenly judgment. And science, even unintentionally, finds clues. Human bones of abnormal size have been reported in ancient excavations, some missing without explanation, others suppressed because they seemed impossible. Of course, there is exaggeration and fraud in many cases, but the idea itself persists. Why do all cultures, without exception, have legends of giants destroyed by the gods? Perhaps because they were all born from the same memory of the end. And if we look at the map of megaliths, Stonehenge, Baalbek, the pyramids, Cusco, Tiahuanaco, they form mysterious energy lines, as if they were remnants of a lost global network. Peoples without contact with each other built identical temples, facing the stars, as if they were trying to reconnect with their origins, or with those who taught them before they disappeared. And amidst this sacred geometry, there is a shadow, that of a judged world that dared to touch the divine with impure hands. The Nephilim weren't just monsters, they were a mirror of humanity. They showed what happens when creation tries to be creator, when the creature tries to sit on God's throne. The flood was the boundary drawn by eternity, the reminder that not even angels can transcend the Creator's decrees. But the most frightening thing is realizing that the pattern repeats itself. In every era, humanity seeks the same thing: power without purity, knowledge without obedience, ascension without humility. It was so before the first flood. It was so before Noah, and it is so now. Perhaps the true secret of the Nephilim is not the size of their bodies, but the reflection they left within us, the seed of the fall. And while the seas guard the ruins of the first world, perhaps the heavens still guard the decree: never again shall you destroy the whole earth because of them. But never again is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of the final judgment. For the same God who destroyed the giants promised a final judgment, not by water, but by fire. And when the fire falls, the echoes of the giants may awaken, not in flesh but in memory, reminding us that the first world was erased because it dared to touch what was holy. Perhaps the giants were not just legend, but the reason for the first divine extinction. And when the water took the giants, what remained of their secrets? The stones still whisper, the ruins still breathe, and the silence of the sea holds the next mystery. What if, beneath the silent seas, the heart of a forgotten world still beat? What if every submerged stone were an echo of voices that cried out before Noah? The ocean, so vast and unfathomable, is not just the limit of the visible world, it is the tomb of the first. When we delve into history, the abyss returns questions that science fears to answer. Entire cities lie hidden beneath the waves, structures so ancient and precise that they challenge everything we know about the past. How could civilizations exist more than 12,000 years ago, when, according to official history, humans were still learning to plant crops? The sea holds secrets that books don't tell, and perhaps the greatest of these is the testimony of a flood that came before Noah's. In Japan, deep within Yonaguni, lies a mountain of stone carved with impossible angles. Staircases, terraces, and perfectly aligned columns form what appears to be a lost city. Some archaeologists try to claim it's natural, but the symmetrical blocks, cut at 90 degrees, scream otherwise. Yonaguni isn't a coincidence. It's petrified memory. It's as if a world has been swallowed up, yet still wants to be remembered. In the Gulf of Cambay, India, the waters hid something even more intriguing. At a depth of 36 meters, sonar and divers found the remains of a city with straight streets, walls, squares, and even the remains of fossilized wooden buildings. Carbon-14, 9,000 years. That's 5,000 years before Egypt. Civilization before civilizations. And most frightening, ancient Hindu texts, such as the Mahabharata, they already spoke of a flood that destroyed the peoples of old, long before Noah. Coincidence, or collective memory of the same divine judgment that swept the earth? The Bible is more subtle, but no less revealing. In Genesis 1:2, even before the creation of Adam, there is a cryptic phrase, "And the earth was formless and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep." Some theologians believe that there lies the gap between two worlds, the gap between a destroyed creation and a recreated one. It wouldn't be chaos, but the consequence of something that came before. The earth was covered by waters because something had already been judged. It's the theory of recreation, the idea that Genesis doesn't narrate the first creation, but the restoration of a planet wounded by a previous fall. A new Eden is born from the rubble of a drowned age. The same pattern repeats itself: corruption, judgment, rebirth, and the submerged ruins seem to echo this pattern. They're not just stones. They're scars, silent testaments to the fact that time holds memories that humanity chose to forget. Atlantis, the oldest and most enduring myth, is another fragment of this mystery. Plato describes it as an island of splendor, where men mingled with the gods, and where pride overcame obedience. The result? A day and a night of destruction. Giant waves swallowed temples, towers, and kingdoms, and all was lost. For many, an allegory. But what if it is more than myth? What if Plato, like the scribes of the Bible, merely recorded an ancestral memory, the echo of a previous world swept away by waters of judgment? The same is true of the Black Sea. Geological studies show that about 7,000 years ago, it was a vast freshwater lake, until suddenly the Mediterranean burst through the Bosphorus Strait, flooding the valley and swallowing everything in its path. The now submerged shores reveal remains of human habitation, as if history had frozen the moment the flood arrived. All these places have something in common. They were swallowed by the sea in a single instant, and they all tell in their own way the same story, a world that fell through pride, that dared to be greater than its creator. And isn't it curious that the Bible describes the flood as an act of purification, as if the water had been sent not just to destroy, but to begin anew? In every layer of mud and silence, perhaps the ocean holds the spiritual DNA of an age that defied heaven. Imagine the scenes: crystal temples, golden cities, towers that touch the clouds, and suddenly the roar of the abyss opening. The tides rising like walls, the ground splitting in two. The sound of judgment echoing in thunder, light being swallowed by the foam. And then silence. The whole world wiped out in a breath, but the seas never forget. They keep. The abyss in biblical theology is not just a physical place, it is a spiritual memory. It represents the state of things before divine order, a space between being and non-being, and it is there, ancient texts say, that God confined the fallen angels, the watchers of the Book of Enoch, after they corrupted the earth. Perhaps this is why the depths have always been associated with fear, mystery, and the sacred. When men dive too deep, they discover fragments of something that eternity tried to hide. What if Yonaguni, Cambay, and the Black Sea ruins weren't just geological reminders, but signs of a time when the divine needed to press the button of creation and begin again? This idea of recreation is powerful. Genesis 1:2-3 becomes not the absolute beginning, but the beginning of a cycle. Let there be light would then be the first breath of mercy after the chaos. And this changes everything, because it means that before Adam, before Eden, before Noah, there was already a fall, judgment, and renewal. God does not erase, He transforms. He makes the abyss a womb of rebirth. And if the previous humanity was destroyed, it was so that another could learn, although, ironically, it would make the same mistakes. The submerged ruins are like mirrors of the past, reminding us that nothing remains hidden forever. They defy human chronology because they belong to a divine timeline, where sin always meets the same end, being swallowed by the waters until repentance blossoms again. In every coral-covered rock lies an untold story, a forgotten altar, an interrupted prayer, and if you listen closely, you can almost feel the ocean whispering names that no longer exist. The abyss is not just the end, it is the archive of eternity. Perhaps that's why civilizations that flourished later, like the Egyptians and Sumerians, began by building pyramids and temples facing the sky, as if trying to reconnect with the Creator after an era of oblivion. They rose from the ashes of a drowned world with the unconscious instinct not to repeat the fall of the ancients. But the cycle repeats itself, always: corruption, judgment, purification. Humanity rises, challenges, falls, and the sea returns to reclaim what is its own. Even today, in our age of technology and hubris, the pattern remains the same. We build digital towers, control seas and skies, and believe we master time. But the ruins beneath the waves remind us there was a time when others believed this too, and were erased. Ancient theology saw the sea as a symbol of primordial chaos, the place where evil is contained until the day of final judgment. When Revelation says, "And the sea was no more," it's not just about geography. It's about the end of chaos, the moment when all memory of rebellion will finally be cleansed. But until then, the sea still speaks, and what it says is both haunting and sacred. Remember what has been forgotten. The ruins of Yonaguni, Cambay, Atlantis, and the Black Sea are not just archaeological curiosities. They are petrified sermons. Each stone is a warning. The Creator does not forget His justice. And perhaps, when the last ocean dries up and the light touches the depths, all these cities will emerge again, not to be inhabited, but to witness. Because beneath the waters lies not only stone, but the memory of humanity that forgot the Creator. And if God erased this world, why can we still feel its echoes today? From the beginning, the waters were the boundary between chaos and life. They were the veil separating the invisible from the visible, the sound of divine silence. Before the first breath, the Spirit hovered over them, not to destroy them, but to order them. For the waters have always been more than destruction. They have been the womb of recreation. When the flood descended upon Noah's world, it was neither the first nor the last act of judgment. It was merely the reflection of an eternal cycle, the same one that wiped out submerged civilizations, the same one that washed away the blood of forgotten ages. What changes is not the water, but the consciousness of the people it seeks to purify. Humanity has always viewed water with fear. The sea represents the unknown, that which cannot be controlled, that which reminds us of our smallness. But for God, the sea is the instrument of a new beginning. Each flood is a page being turned, a new chapter in the covenant between the Creator and creation. Because divine judgment is never the end, it is the beginning of mercy. When the waters rose and swallowed mountains and towers, God wasn't just destroying, He was cleansing what had become corrupt. It was love in the form of chaos, justice in the form of a tide. The same love that judged the ancient world also prepared the way for the rainbow, the visible seal of the eternal promise. The flood is both a sentence and a baptism. It is the most perfect symbol of what God does within each soul, submerging the old self so that the new can breathe. Just as the world emerged from the waters with a new covenant, we too are called to die and be reborn in them, not physically but spiritually. Because waters not only destroy what is impure, they also purify what survives. Noah wasn't saved because he built an ark. He was saved because he obeyed. The ark was the physical reflection of faith. It was wood and obedience, faith and patience. And when the world cried out, he remained silent, trusting in the promise he couldn't yet see. The rain, which was terror for everyone, was for Noah the sound of renewal. And so it is with all who understand the purpose of judgment. They do not see punishment, they see healing. Because the true miracle is not surviving the flood, but understanding why it happened. The waters always come to restore the lost balance. And every time humanity forgets God, the cycle begins again. Corruption, judgment, purification, hope. The flood was the reset of creation. But it was also the most profound act of love, because God doesn't destroy for pleasure, he destroys to rebuild. The same God who opened the floodgates of heaven also opened Noah's heart to see the future. And when the rain ceased, the wind blew again over the waters just as in the beginning. The Spirit hovered over the abyss again, and a new world emerged. The damp, silent earth awaited the first steps of the new humanity. And then, on the grey horizon, an arc of colours tore across the sky. It wasn't just light, it was the first promise, a reminder that even when the earth is shrouded in shadow, the covenant lives on. The rainbow was the seal of mercy. "No more flood of waters," said the Creator. But what he really promised was deeper. "Never again will I destroy life without first offering salvation." This promise spans the centuries and speaks to us today. Because the floods never stopped coming, they just changed form. Today, the waters don't fall from the sky. They fall within us. They are the storms of the soul, the seas of guilt, the rivers of regret. And yet, the purpose is the same, to restore what was lost. Every tear is a drop of a flood that cleanses the heart. Every loss is a spiritual flood that makes room for a new garden to flourish. God still purifies with invisible waters, the waters of the Spirit. But there is an essential difference between Noah's flood and the current ones. The former destroyed bodies, the latter wants to transform hearts. The Apostle Peter wrote that the world that then was perished, being covered with water, but the heavens and the earth that now are reserved for fire. It's the same symbolic language of a God who speaks in cycles, the same judgment, another form, because the next flood will not come from water, but from fire. And it is not the fire of punishment, but the fire of truth. The fire that does not destroy, it refines. The fire that does not burn, it illuminates. Just as the waters washed the earth, fire will purify souls. The final judgment will not be the end of the world, but the beginning of the definitive one where there will be no more chaos, no more sea, no more tears. Revelation says that in the new heaven and the new earth, the sea will be no more. This phrase has always intrigued those who love mystery, but it doesn't mean there will be no oceans. It means that the inner chaos, the sea of inconstancy that separates man from God, will finally be pacified. The end of the sea is the beginning of light. And perhaps the first world sank so that the second might learn to seek heaven. For the flood was not merely a punishment, it was a reminder. Even when the earth sinks beneath the waters, God's promise lives on above them. The submerged ruins, the fossils of time, and the legends of lost civilizations are shadows of the same spiritual teaching. Man can forget the Creator, but the Creator never forgets man. God always finds a way to renew the covenant, whether with the rainbow or the cross. A pact made of light, where water becomes a symbol of rebirth, and fire, of eternal purification. When the world drowned, The ark became the floating temple of hope. When Christ died, the wood of the cross became the new ark, bearing all who believe across the sea of humanity. And just as the ark rested on Mount Ararat, the cross stood on Mount Calvary, both pointing to heaven, both being the meeting point between judgment and mercy. The waters taught the world to fear, the blood taught the world to love. Today, humanity once again lives on the water's edge. The tides of pride and vanity rise faster than ever. Cities shine like Atlantis before its fall. And the roar of the abyss approaches, soft, like the distant sound of a storm that has not yet arrived. But among the clouds there is an arch. The light still speaks, because the Creator continues to fulfill his promise. He always sends a sign before judgment, a hope before the storm. The waters, with all their fury, are only the prelude to grace. The true flood is what washes the heart, and the promise of light is what keeps the soul from drowning. The cycle isn't over, it's just changed form. Today, the flood comes in tears, in losses, in crises, and each of us carries our own ark, faith. It is with faith that we navigate the storms of existence while God leads us to a new horizon. And when the waters recede, and they always do, we will see the arch again, because God's love never drowns. He is the light that remains upon the waters. Noah's flood ended with a rainbow. The soul's flood ends with a new dawn. And perhaps, when the last wave of time recedes, when the last abyss is silent, and the fire of truth purifies the whole world, we will understand the true meaning of everything. That judgment was never revenge. It was love trying to teach us to breathe again. What if the next flood doesn't come from water, but from fire? There is an instant between the end of the waters and the beginning of light when the universe seems to hold its breath. A second of cosmic silence where neither the sound of the wind nor the song of the angels dare stir. It is in this interval that the voice of God manifests itself not in words, but in absence. Because silence is the language of the divine. He speaks when everything has already been said. The ultimate horizon is not before our eyes, but within our soul. It is the point where man realizes that time is not a line. It is a sacred cycle which always begins and ends in the same place, the heart of God. The first flood wiped out the cities, the second the giants, the third the idols. But there is a final flood, the one that purifies the spirit, and it has already begun. We live in a day where technology has replaced temples and faith has become a memory. But even now, amid the ruins of a world that has forgotten its creator, the promise still shines like an indestructible spark. Humanity is once again on the threshold of judgment, not of destruction, but of revelation. Because the final judgment is not the collapse of the earth, it is the awakening of consciousness. Since Eden, God has been searching for a place to dwell and has discovered that the only eternal temple is within man. But this temple needs to be purified. And that is why the waters return, why the fire comes, why silence descends. The apocalypse, far from being the end, is the ultimate restoration. It is a return to the origin. When John saw a new heaven and a new earth, he didn't see a new physical world. He saw creation itself being reborn within the divine light. And in this new creation, there is no more sea. The sea, symbol of the abyss, fear and oblivion, finally calms. The chaos that existed between man and the Creator disappears. And what remains is pure harmony. Light upon light, sound upon sound, upon eternity. Perhaps the true purpose of floods has always been this, to teach us to see the divine even in the waves that drown us. Because every judgment is, in fact, a promise in disguise. God never wanted to simply destroy. He wanted to reveal, to show that behind the thunder there is love, that behind the lightning there is tenderness, that the fire that purifies is the same that illuminates. Man feared the flood because he saw it from the outside, but if he saw it from the inside, if he understood what the waters really do, he would understand that they are God's embrace, trying to erase what time has corrupted. The true end of the world is the beginning of understanding, and when that end comes, there will be no screams, no thunder, only silence. A silence so profound that the universe itself will seem to bow before the truth. At that moment, the rivers will return to their origin, the stars to their song, and man to his essence. The Creator will not say, "It's over." He will say, "It is restored." The earth, washed by the tears of history, will once again be a garden. A new Eden will emerge, not made of clay but of light, and at the center of this new world there will be no temple, because God Himself will be the temple. And then we will understand what the ancients already knew in secret, that the flood was not a punishment, but a lesson, a divine way of teaching that every fall is also a chance for rebirth. The first world drowned, the second learned to breathe, the third will learn to fly, because the coming flood will not come of water nor of fire, it will come of glory. And when this glory covers the earth, the seas will be silent, time will cease, and silence will be perfect. In this silence we will finally hear what God always wanted to say. Everything I drowned, I did to teach you to float. Everything I took, I did to teach you to seek what is eternal. Everything I destroyed, I recreated with love. And in the face of this love there will be no fear left, only light. For at the end of all floods, of all ages and of all worlds, only light remains. If you were impressed by the mysteries of the flood that time forgot, if you felt the weight of giants, of erased civilizations, and the secrets of the Creator, leave your like now, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next revelation, and tell us in the comments, what secret of the Bible do you believe is still hidden, waiting to be discovered?